When it comes to investing, there are a variety of things that you need to be aware of that could pose a risk to your portfolio. Let's dive into the two different types of risks that you need to be aware of relative to your investments. The first type of risk, systematic risk, also known as market risk. This is a type of risk that infects the entire market. It cannot be diversified and it's uncontrollable from an investing perspective. Think of the global recession that impacted the entire market. The second type of risk is unsystematic risk. This is risk that can be diversified. An example of unsystematic risk that can be diversified is a company having a faulty product that needs to be recalled, or employees of a company going on strike. See, the reason you can diversify away from unsystematic risk is because it's usually company specific, geography specific, or sector specific. So today we're going to talk about concentration risk, the risk of being over concentrated in a single stock, in a single sector, in a single geography, and even a single asset class. Now, what type of risk is concentration risk? Well, at its core, concentration risk is unsystematic risk. Why? Because we can diversify our allocation and we have control over how we're concentrated in a particular stock, sector, geography, or even asset class. Now, that said, concentration risk can actually turn into systematic risk, market risk. What do I mean by this? Well, if you have an over allocation into a particular sector or stock, this can lead to market risk. If you're over concentrated in a particular sector or industry, and if that sector or industry faces a big negative outcome that infects the entire market, this can turn into systematic risk, market risk. Some examples of this would be the dot-com bubble, the '08 crisis, and even the SVB collapse most recently. So see, the key here is with unsystematic risk, we want to make sure that we diversify away from the risks associated there. So, like any risk, obviously concentration risk can have a major impact on your portfolio if you aren't allocated in a way to diversify away from it. And like we just mentioned, this type of risk, while we can diversify away from it, we risk the chance of this becoming market risk, which we cannot diversify away from. So as it relates to concentration risk, there are four main things that I want to address today relative to your investments and your portfolio. Broken down, concentration risk comes in many different forms. The first type of concentration risk, single stock concentration. Put simply, this is having too many of your eggs in one single position, one single stock. The second type of concentration risk is sector or industry concentration risk. As it states, this is having too many of your eggs in a particular sector or industry. Think having too much invested in financial services or technology or energy. And the third type of concentration risk, this is asset class concentration risk. This is having too many of your eggs invested in one asset class. Think stocks or bonds, making sure that you have a diversified portfolio. And lastly, geography concentration. Geography concentration is just as it reads, having too many of your eggs invested in one geography. So let's go back and let's dive into single stock concentration. And the biggest question that we should be asking ourselves here is, how much is too concentrated? How much should a position make up of my entire portfolio? Is 5% too much? Is 7% too much? Is 8% too much? Is 10% or 20% too much? What should that number be? What percent of my portfolio should a single stock or position make up? And as a general rule of thumb, Once a single stock or a single position hits 15 to 20% of your portfolio, this can generally be seen as having too much risk. Now, do keep in mind that might be way more than what you are willing to do as an investor. And for some, being highly concentrated is their style of investing. So this is unique to you and your goals. Remember, like we always talk about on this channel, your investments need to be aligned with the goals that you are trying to achieve, whether those are short-term or long-term. So there are a couple ways to analyze if you are too concentrated into a single position. The easiest way to do this would be to take the current market value of that position and to divide it into the current market value of your total portfolio. This will give you a percent. And now if you tell yourself, hey, my threshold for concentration is that one position can't make up more than 5 or 10% of my portfolio, then you are going to want to make sure that no individual position within your portfolio makes up either 5 to 10% of your total portfolio value. So this is the easiest way to analyze that. Another way that we can do this is by using our tool, which you can get access to in the description. If you click on the Create Your Free Retirement Plan, this concentration tool is in that plan. So let's dive into Dave and Carol here. If we click on Investments and we go to Concentration, we can see here that we have our concentrated position summary. And for Dave and Carol, they have a total portfolio balance today of about $430,000. Now, as we can see here, we have certain thresholds for them. They don't want any one position to make up over 10% of their total portfolio. Now, guys, this is hypothetical here, but as we can see here, they have one stock position that makes up a total of 21.27% of their portfolio, meaning they are 79% diversified. The other 79% of their portfolio is diversified. So if we scroll down here, if we say, hey, we want a concentration threshold of 10% of the total portfolio, meaning we don't want any one position to make up more than 10% of our portfolio, we can see here that we should consider liquidating $48,860 of this one position to bring that percentage from 21% down to 10%. Now, if we say, hey, you know what, 10% is too much. We actually want to shoot for 7%. And as we can see here, we should consider liquidating $61,861 of this position. So guys, there's a variety of ways that you can analyze single stock concentration. But what I encourage you to do is look at your portfolio and make sure that from an allocation perspective, you are diversified and not too many of your eggs are in one single position. This brings us in to the second type of concentration risk. And that second type of concentration risk is sector or industry concentration. Using the same example of Dave and Carol, we're going to go into the equity sector and style widget. And what we can see here is an equity sector comparison. How are we invested across these different sectors? And in the blue, we can see the market index. This is how the market index is allocated. So for example, in consumer cyclical, the market index has 10.62%. And in technology, the market index has 33.13%. And in communication services, the market index has 9.34%. So as a comparison to our broad market index, for both Dave and Carol, we can see here that we are most overweight in technology and most underweight in financial services. And graphically, we can see this. If we look at financial services, our portfolio is allocated into financial services at 9.5% versus the market index at 13.67%. And now because of that single stock concentration that we just looked at, our technology allocation is 54% versus the market index at 33%. And so guys, this is a really good way to look at your portfolio from a sector perspective to make sure that you are diversified, that you have some investments in each separate sector. And as we can see here, if we would like, we could compare our portfolio against what the market index is doing. So if we go into the equity styles, we can see here the equity style comparison between our portfolio and the market index. And we can see here that amongst the equity styles, our portfolio, is most overweight in large blend and most underweight in large growth. And we can see here that the market index is also invested in a large blend allocation. And so these percentages here resemble the exposure that we have into each equity style. Small value, small blend, small growth, mid blend, mid value. And then we have large growth, large blend, large value. So this just really gives us a good idea visually of, hey, how is your portfolio invested? And if you do want to make changes, if you want more mid-cap blend exposure, what should we do in our portfolio to achieve that? If we want more large cap growth exposure, what should we do in our portfolio to achieve that? So using this in association with our concentration widget should and will help you create a diversified portfolio. The last thing that we want to look at here is asset class concentration and geography concentration. So if we go into our asset allocation, we can see a breakdown of how we are invested. We can see that for Dave and Carol, we have a 74-26 portfolio. That is 74% equity, 26% fixed income. And within our equity holdings, we can see that 72% of our equities are invested in the US, with 0.3% invested internationally and 0% in emerging markets. We can see here that we have 24.6% in US bonds and 1.6% in international bonds. Now, when we think about asset class concentration risk, we can see here that we're pretty well diversified. We have a 74-26 portfolio. So now asset class and allocation is really going to be the most unique sort of risk to you. What I mean by that is based on your goals, based on whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, you might have a portfolio allocation that looks much different than this. You might be okay having 90% equities in your portfolio. You might be okay having 75% bonds or fixed income in your portfolio. So what you really want to do is you want to identify those goals and then work your way backwards into an investment strategy that makes most sense for you based on those goals. If those goals are preservation of capital and you have a 90% allocation into equities, maybe you should think about that because you might have some serious risk there as it relates to too much stock exposure. Now, if your goal is long-term capital appreciation and growth on the flip side, and you have a 90% allocation into bonds, you might want to rethink that because maybe you're invested too conservatively. And as a result, this could pose a risk to your portfolio. So do you see what I'm getting at? The allocation side of your portfolio, the asset classes that you are invested in are going to be the most custom to you and your goals. Now let's look at geography risk. Geography risk is something that impacts everyone. Having too many of your eggs invested into one geography. And as we can see here, of our equities, we have the 72.3% of the 74% invested in US equities, with 0.3% in international equities and 0% in emerging markets. Well, the reality is we should probably look at this and make sure that this is aligned with our goals because we are carrying a lot of geography risk relative to our equity allocation with virtually 100% of it being invested in US equities. And now looking at our bonds, we can see here that of the 26%, we are heavy 24.6% into US bonds and 1.6% into international bonds. Again, what if they have a negative correlation where international bonds do well, but US bonds do poorly, or vice versa? US bonds do well in a certain period of time and international bonds do poorly. How are we invested across international and US bonds to help us achieve our goals? Does a 24.6% of our 26% allocated to bonds in the US make sense for us? So looking at our geography concentration, we want to make sure that we are properly diversified to best support your goals in retirement. At the end of the day, over-concentration into a single stock, into a single industry or sector, into a single asset class, or into a single geography can pose serious risk to your portfolio. If you are unsure of how you are allocated today, I encourage you, one, to start with just divide that position into your total portfolio balance and see how much of your total portfolio that position makes up. If you want a more comprehensive breakdown where you can analyze each and every holding, where you can jump into each and every sector and style and geography and asset class, then I encourage you to click the link in the description and create your free plan just like this so that you can analyze how you are invested and the goals behind that investment. The idea here is your investments are the vehicle that help you achieve your long-term goals in retirement. As always, I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much, and until next time, we'll see you later.